Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning on our Clallam EDC Coffee Chat. We are really happy to have Josh Weiss and also Bruce Beckett, who is another lobbyist that represents the Port of Port Angeles, join us. Josh, of course, represents the North Olympic Legislative Alliance, a group of businesses and governments between Clallam and Jefferson counties. So first off, just a few housekeeping items. If you'll put your computer on mute if you're not speaking, so we don't pick up any background noise, we would really appreciate it. We will have this recorded and up on our website before the end of the day, probably by the afternoon, and you'll be able to share it or watch it from there if you'd like. And today, what we're going to be learning about is the outcome of the 2022 legislative session. Of course, it ends tomorrow, so there could still be some last minute changes, but there were lots of bills that died on the floor. So I'm really interested to learn about that and hear from our experts. So Josh and Bruce, take it away. And thanks so much for taking the time to do this with us.
Yeah, thanks, Colleen. It's good to be here and nice to see everyone. I do appreciate having Bruce's input too. It's really helpful. It's nice to have two minds, and Bruce covers a little bit different areas than I do sometimes. And so yeah, we're 2 days away. Tomorrow is sine die. Yesterday, the final capital budget came out, was released, and Colleen, you did a great putting all that information in the chat. That's a good summary for EDAs on sort of what's in there. It's a large capital budget. They made a lot of investments across the board, and a lot of, particularly housing, was a real big emphasis. And we're waiting to see today at noon, the conference committee on the transportation budgets is meeting. So we should see the final supplemental and new spending transportation budgets around midday today. And then operating budget, I'm not sure, Bruce, if what you've heard. I was hearing maybe later today, but we still don't see a conference committee that's been scheduled. So I think it'll be hopefully not this evening, but later today, we'll see the operating budget. And I know, there's still a lot of question about how exactly this is going to shake out. We'll be really interested to see the transportation budgets today. What I've heard is that so both the House and the Senate moved away from the idea of the exported fuel tax. The House came out publicly last week with the idea of sweeping the Public Works Assistance Account, which is a program that run by the Public Works Board, the local governments use for basic infrastructure. Got a lot of blowback on that proposal. The Senate never really adopted that proposal. They were talking about sweeping a fund called the Model Toxics Control Account, which is funded by a tax on hazardous substances, including petroleum products. And that also gets used for a lot of some county programs for solid waste, but also for a lot of environmental programs at Department of Ecology. So they got a lot of blowback for that idea. So kind of what we're hearing is that they're probably moving even more money out of the general fund instead of sweeping much of those accounts, maybe taking some still from the Public Works account. So I don't know, Bruce, if you've heard anything different or in addition to that on speculation on where we think the transportation budget's going.
No, that's actually, I'm learning from you. I've heard they've tossed out the other two ideas of MACA and Public Works, but I hadn't heard, okay, then what? I guess one observation I'll make, Josh, is that we've gone through a 2-year legislative cycle right now where, I don't know, 30% of the members of the legislature were new last year. That's, roughly, and they've never had a chance to meet in person. They're kind of, at least with people like Josh and I. And this year is extraordinary. The amount of money that the state has to spend, we'll never see this again. And so, you've got 30% of the legislature going to come back next year, presumably, along with whoever newly elected, and their base of knowledge is all this money. I mean, what was the increase in the capital budget, Josh? $1.5 billion?
Yeah.
I mean, for Jim Buck, that probably would have been a total capital budget almost in the day, but that's a supplemental on top of what was already put together. So everyone's sort of frame of reference is going to have to get readjusted next year.
Yeah, and I saw a figure the other day, right, that revenues have grown 25% since the last biennium. I mean, it's just, Bruce is exactly right. It's just unprecedented, and we know is definitely not going to last. And one of the things that they are doing is spending a lot of operating dollars on infrastructure. They're moving operating dollars. Pardon me, I'm going to sneeze. Oh, maybe not. They're moving operating dollars into the capital budget, and they're moving operating dollars into the transportation budget, which will be one-time expenditures, right? So that's a good thing. And that, from my opinion, is the way they should be spending a lot of that. But they are doing a lot of new program creation too. And the tenor, just to to carry on from what Bruce was saying, the combination of all these new legislators, and it's a bipartisan phenomenon, along with the virtual session, means that there are a bunch of legislators that really don't know how to or necessarily want to negotiate ideas and negotiate bills. They kind of, what they know about legislating, they learned from the news, and a lot of that's from Washington, D.C., and they come in and want to just roll over people rather than negotiate. And so it's been a hard environment. Jim, they need a tie like you had when you had to actually negotiate with the other party and come up with good solutions. There were better policy outcomes in that scenario.
Yeah.
So I do think we're going to finish tomorrow. There was a point in time last week where I was feeling like they weren't going to be able to finish transportation in time, but I think we've passed that. At least I hope we have. And so let me talk a little bit about the NOLA priorities. We had 3 priorities this year, and I'm going to list the priorities, and I'm going to go back and talk about each one of them. The first was extending the 0.09 credit against the sales tax for rural economic development infrastructure projects. The second was a kind of a catch-all category called, focused around rural community economic impacts. And within that, we had a focus on apprenticeships and workforce housing and local contracting. We also threw in there an issue related to electrician apprenticeships. And then the third priority was making sure that the lower Elwha bridge didn't lose funding. So on the 0.09, that bill was House Bill 1333. It was Representative Theringer's. Just like last year, bill came across from the House with a full head of steam and managed to get through both the Policy Committee and the Ways and Means Committee, and then hit a roadblock in the Rules Committee. Haven't gotten it forward yet. I will say that there is still a push going on for it. It is technically dead. It has not met the cutoffs in time, but they can waive those rules anytime they want to. And there's a fairly, I would say, influential handful of rural Democratic legislators that are really trying to impress upon Senate Democratic leadership that this is an important bill for rural areas. And if they want to continue to compete at all in the rural areas, they need to be helping with these kinds of programs. So far, that hasn't been unsuccessful. That group has included Senator Van de Weg has been right in the middle of that. Senator Lovelet from Skagit County, and then Representative Shoemake, who's up in Whatcom County and is running for the Senate for the seat that was vacated by Senator Doug Erickson when he passed away. So she's really interested in having this as a feather in her cap when she runs for the Senate. We, have gotten great support from Representative Theringer. We've gotten very good support from Senator Van de Wick. We just got to see if this is going to be part of the sort of final end game set of bills that they run. I was more optimistic yesterday than I've been for a few days. I don't know quite, I haven't heard anything today, so I'm not quite sure what to think on this, but I think it's still in play.
So Josh, is there someone in particular in the Rules Committee that's preventing it from coming out? Do you know?
Yes, there is. His name's Andy Billig, and he is the Senate Majority Leader. And his caucus is running the show, and he's their head. So
does he have an issue with this process in particular, or is it just not a priority for him?
I think there's two that we've continued to hear different things along the way in the process. And it is really from a handful of influential Senate Democrats that we have the problem. And there's kind of maybe two types of concern. One is just the idea that this is money that the state otherwise would be going into the state general fund. And there's really no way for the budget writers to account for the amount of money that is going out into this program when they do write their budgets. It's basically off the books, if you will, for them. And they don't like that. It's committed. And then the other kind of concern that we hear is just about, is there accountability? Despite the fact that the state auditor's office does audits on the expenditure of these dollars, counties report to the auditor's office every year on their expenditures. And so Senator Billig has basically, and those are kind of, Senator Rolfes, who's the chair of Ways and Means Committee, kind of leads the charge on those concerns. Senator Billig's perspective is we still have those concerns that she has, and this program doesn't run out for another 9 years, which is very debated, right? I was having conversation with a Senate Republican yesterday from Walla Walla County who's pushing hard on this. And, he looks at the statute, he's like, I don't know if it runs out next year, if it runs out in 9 years. The statute's pretty ambiguous. But there is one reading that says it does run out, not for some time. So Billig looks at that and he says, we've got time in the future to renew this. We don't need to do it right now. Part of our counter argument has been, well, we'd like to be able to bond against it, particularly when you've got these federal dollars coming through the IIJA, and other potential federal funding. We'd like the ability to have these dollars available for local match. So that's kind of the counter argument that we've been making, and we'll just have to see how it goes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. In the rural community economic developments, I think we made some progress on this. Senator Kaiser passed a apprenticeship bill that is controversial in some ways. It does have some pretty significant expansions of apprenticeship benefits. But it also includes a study, and Colleen, this is really from your testimony in front of her committee when this bill came forward, about the need for apprenticeships in rural areas. And so that bill has a study about how L&I can be better providing apprenticeships in rural areas. It's not a final solution, but it is a step in the right direction. And I feel like, your testimony and our work on this issue has really put a nice highlight on this problem. Kind of a related issue, but a different bill, was Senate Bill 5599, and that had to do with electricians' apprenticeships. And this is something that was brought to NOLA from Hans Fredrickson Electric in Port Townsend. And the fact that after June of next year, electrical apprentices that are working for a certified O1 electrician, that's a electrician that can do both commercial and residential projects, they have to be registered with the state apprenticeship program in order to be able to continue to work. That requirement was put into place 3 years ago, 2 years ago maybe, and has not, a lot of electricians out there don't know about the requirement and haven't been able to get their staff to meet the requirement. So there's a lot of people that in June of 23 are going to lose their ability to work, and a lot of apprenticeship shops that or a lot of electrical shops that are going to lose their trainee.
Mhm. So just very quickly, between our two counties, there's only 4 electrical contractors that are union that have formal apprenticeship programs. All the others are non-union shops. And I only found one when I went through, not a scientific process, but starting on Yelp and checking each one of them on LNI to see if they were residential contractors or general, which means they can do both. And there was only one I found that only did residential. And so all the others are training people in-house basically, and they're not going to be able to do that anymore come July 1st, 2023. And they, one, aren't prepared and aren't aware, and 2, they're the only solution really is for them, for the trainees to drive all the way to Puyallup, I guess, something should be open by then, to take classes there. So it's just not accessible. And we already have issues in the construction realm, and that's just going to make things worse.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. And so the bill that came forward would have addressed electrician trainees that are coming in from out of state, maybe worked in the military as an electrician, would have allowed them to count their hours towards an apprenticeship program. We jumped on this bill and really brought up, on behalf of NOLA, and really brought up the broader issue that we're talking about here with electrical apprenticeships, and really forced a conversation about the bigger issue. There was resistance from the electrical unions, as well as the non-union electrical training programs.
Because they don't want to create a class out here. They want everybody to drive to the I-5 corridor to take the classes.
Well, I would say the classes currently are either on the I-5 corridor or in the Bremerton area, and they don't want to see the date pushed out because they've invested in building up infrastructure to provide this training in some places. And if the date gets pushed out, then the pressure to use those facilities, gets released a little bit.
I didn't know there was a location in Bremerton. I hadn't heard that.
I think it's
Okay.
no, I'm sorry, it's an IBEW location.
Yeah, so it's a union location. So
Right.
if you're not, only those 4 shops can
Right.
attend union
Colleen?
classes. But anyway, yes.
Colleen, has anybody talked to Peninsula College about making?
Yes.
Yes, okay,
We're trying to go that route, but that would have to be a special pilot program.
great, thank you.
Get approval for that. Thanks, Ray.
So we had that bill basically set up as a task force to look at problems with providing apprenticeships, availability of apprenticeships in rural areas. It got beat up pretty hard because the electricians did come in eventually pretty strong on that bill and raise the problem as well, along with NOLA. And the bill did not move forward. And I will say that this is one that Senator Vandeweghe was a rock star on when it was over in the Senate. Representative Theringer stepped up when it got over to the House. The bill died, which I think will really, IBEW and CITC, the non-union trains, really wanted this bill. We're going to need to come back and revisit it, or they're going to need to come back and revisit it next session. And I think they're going to be a lot more motivated to have a conversation about the date and how training's going. I also think there's a pretty decent opportunity that we see some resources in the operating budget for the LNI to do outreach and information education with rural electricians about the requirement. And also the potential, I'm not sure if Representative Theringer is going to get this in there, but the potential for a pilot project out on the Olympic Peninsula to see if the community college could provide that. So that's something we'll be looking for. But I will just say, sort of tooting NOLA's horn here, I think this is an issue that we really bent the needle on. We made a difference on this issue. There's nothing tangible to show for it yet, but we really got ourselves a seat at the table and have marked out some territory on this already. So I think that'll be a win, even though there is nothing we can point to and say we finished this issue yet.
And when we talk about rural issues, it's a death by 1,000 cuts. This is one of those cuts that we were trying to address. We know it's not huge in the grand scheme of things, but certainly was going to take things in the wrong direction for us.
Totally.
And thank you, Josh. He was a rock star with this, as was Kate Dean from Jefferson County.
That's really true. And Hans Fredrickson too. I mean, we had several stakeholder groups with conversations with LNI and the partnerships that were very frustrating, but ultimately, I think productive. The other thing I would say I'd highlight in this space is there will be in the operating budget some resources for the Municipal Research Services Center to provide training on local government contracting procedures, both for local governments in how to use supplemental bidding criteria, which can be used to give preference to local contractors, but also for rural contractors in how to interface with local government procurement processes, contracting processes. So I think that'll be a step in the right direction as well about this local contracting issue that we've been raising and talking about.
Yes.
And in the last issue, the Lower Elwha Bridge were, no issues there. We were worried about them cutting into the transportation budget, but that's not looking like it's going to happen. And so we're protected there. So that was the direct NOLA work. There were a number of other bills that we ended up tracking, and I know, Colleen, you were interested in hearing about. The first one was Senate Bill 5868, and it allows $0.09, those rural economic development dollars, to be used for affordable housing. And it was first introduced as just workforce housing, which is an issue that NOLA, has been highlighting and the need for. It was amended in the House and came out as it's more than just workforce housing. It's now affordable housing generally. This bill has been controversial, but it did pass. It's on the governor's desk at this point. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I'm not sure if the Senate has concurred on the House amendment, so it's going to the governor's desk. And that's kind of where that one ended up. And Colleen, I don't know if you wanted any more detail on that than just that.
No, I guess that, yeah. So that will expand it if the governor signs off. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. Which is a little ironic, right? That they're not allowing us to extend in time how long we can use the 0.09 program, but they're expanding the uses that we can use it for.
So, and will that allow, currently our county has in their code, how this money can be used. And it does not say it can be used for workforce housing. So would that have to be expanded in the county code in order for that to occur? Because they can make it, okay. So
yeah.
They have the power to expand it if the commission so chooses.
Exactly. Yeah. Think of the state law as sort of your ceiling. You can't go beyond that. You can go below the ceiling. The local governments or the counties can choose a lower threshold, but. Yep.
And the concern has been that there is such a massive need in that space that there won't be funds available for economic development, which is what the funding is for currently.
Right. And keep in mind, Jefferson County has used their $0.09 already in a limited manner for workforce housing relative to workers at the Fort Worden State Park. And they've survived a state audit a couple of times with that use. So I think there was a strong argument that this was already allowed, but the legislature wanted to make it clear.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. You'd also asked about the manufacturing investment. bill program, that was a current that was a program that was in place until July of 2020. It expired at that time, and it was a sales tax deferral program for manufacturing investment in counties with high unemployment. And there was a bill, Senate Bill 5029, that was introduced last year. Actually, it carried over into the session. Unfortunately, it did not move forward this year. So
Okay.
that program is not in place any longer.
Okay, thank you.
There was a tax deferral bill 5901 that I believe the House just concurred on Senate amendments. So that this is still moving forward. It has two components. It's a sales tax deferral, so not an exemption, but a deferral for manufacturing and research and development investment projects. So basically R&D and manufacturing. So that's one component, and that's a local option program that jurisdictions can do. And then the second is an expansion of a current exemption for particular warehouses and distribution centers. And it expands that existing exemption for a portion of the sales tax on warehouses over 100,000 feet. So big warehouses. So some, expansion there of tax credits that can be used locally. Another one I know that NOLA is interested in, 5961, which has to do with biochar. And biochar basically tells state and local agencies to use biochar whenever possible on publicly funded projects. And then there's also a pilot project at the DNR to evaluate whether or not DNR's forest products can be sold to a biochar facility to produce biochar, essentially. So some continued expansion of the use of biochar, which I think is a positive thing for the forest products sector. And I think I lost Bruce. I think Bruce was working on that one.
Yeah.
More than I was. I think he had to drop off though.
Mm-hmm.
And then broadband was kind of the last topic. There were a couple bills that were passed. Oh yeah, Bruce said in chat that he needed to drop. One was 1723, which had to do with broadband equity. And this has been talked about for a couple of years. It was also introduced last year, but did pass this year. And it directs the broadband office to direct a state to create and develop a statewide digital equity plan. And then it also creates a digital equity planning grant program for local governments at the Department of Commerce. And of interest for you will be the fact that in their definition of equity, it does include rural areas. So it's not just, BIPOC communities, but it's also veterans and other definitions that are more broad than that, including rural areas. So that Commerce grant program might be something that the peninsula might be interested in looking into, whether or not you can use it. And it is to just expand broadband into areas that don't currently have it as much. And then I think you put in the chat, Colleen, that they are still continuing to make significant investments in broadband, $100 million additional, this in a supplemental budget, capital budget for broadband. 50 million goes through the broadband office, 25 through the Public Works Board, and then 25 through CURB. There was also a bill this year, and I can't remember the bill number, sorry, I didn't write it down, that changed the state standard for the speeds that broadband needs to be provided at to basically increase it. We have a standard in statute right now that says how fast broadband needs to be, and they basically just raised the bar and made it more difficult to get to. So, that's a good thing. The statewide goal is to make broadband more effective, more useful. So I know Representative Buck is on. Congratulations, got $100 million, this capital budget for school seismic safety program. That's pretty cool. I know that's something you've been working on and emailing me about a couple days ago. Do you want to mention that?
Well, $100,000 is a good foundation, a good start. So we're pleased. Got a long ways to go,
100 million, right? Did I say
100 million.
100 million?
Yeah, and they've earmarked, or they've said that they know they're gonna have to spend at least another 400 million. So this will be a long-term project, and it's gonna cost probably 6 to 8 billion by the time we get done. Over 10 to 15 years.
Well, congratulations. That's pretty
Thank
awesome.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Colleen, any questions or anything else you want to talk about?
I saw in the newspaper, the nursing bill. Can you speak to that a bit?
Probably not in very much detail, but I can try. I'll tell you what I know. So the bill was brought forward by the labor, based essentially on the idea of that, nurses are under such pressure right now because of what's going on in the healthcare system, that there should be standards for how many hours nurses were required to work in a day. And others, when rest breaks needed to all, those types of things. It received an incredible amount of pushback from healthcare providers, who are saying, look, if we have to do this, essentially we're not going to be able to meet the standards, particularly in rural areas where we already have workforce issues. This is going to mean that, less people are going to be able to get medical care because we're not going to be able to stay open we're not going to have the staff to be able to keep the hours that will be needed to meet the demand. As you can imagine, a labor fight in the current legislature was pretty ugly. Ultimately, the bill did not move forward. And I'm not really quite sure what the next steps will be in that discussion. That's pretty much what I know. I'm not sure if we have somebody from the hospital on that might know more of the details, but that's what I know on that one.
Okay. So I'm happy to open it up to people on the call to ask questions of you. There's so many different topics. What about other housing bills? I know there was, and also there is a question in there from Darlene Schanfeld about, will the broadband equity bill mean that we'll have more options to choose from is relative to the number of providers that offer broadband locally?
I don't know, Darlene, I'm sorry. That might be a downstream impact of doing this equity plan, but I don't think it would be like an immediate impact from the bill. I don't believe the bill speaks to that directly. But that might be an outcome as you start to look at, where the providers actually are and where there's limitations on the number of providers.
So is it fair to say that there's a lot more funding available? Our county's received, I think, $24 million, and maybe Randy could speak to this, but I think it will require that funding that has been received be directed to areas where people, and there needs to be consideration for an equity lens around, people that have historically not been receiving funding support from the government in the past, and also veterans and BIPOC and that type of thing. I mean, we have, we've got a lot of poor Caucasian people in our county. And so, I hope it too can be seen as, equity for them as well.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it's broad enough to include that. Particularly, like I said, from the inclusion of rural.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead. I know Colleen has her hand up and there's a question from Debbie in the chat.
Go ahead, Colleen.
Thank you. I just wanted to share on the affordable housing front. I got our advocacy update yesterday. A formal vote will happen today. We got 25 million in the Housing Trust Fund for affordable home ownership. It's an additional 9 million that was awarded in December, an unprecedented level. And there were some several direct appropriations that went to Yakima, Seattle, Tacoma, Spokane, and Island County. And then House Bill 1643 passed, which is a REAP bill that exempts real estate excise tax for nonprofit affordable housing agencies when they buy real estate, which is a huge savings, not having to pay those taxes until after development. So that's a little bit, we worked with Representative Hackney on that particular bill. So it passed 97 yeas and 1 nay. So that's what some of happening on the affordable housing front.
And Colleen, I don't know if your group also was tracking Representative Chop's bill, the Apple housing program, which is now going to allow supportive housing to be paid for by Medicare dollars. And they invest, I want to say like $600 million or something into this program. So I guess the bottom line is there's going to be a huge new expansion of supportive housing, which is, going to be helpful for homelessness and mental health and, those other, housing related issues or issues that we see pressure on housing from as well.
That's great, Josh. I guess our struggle and battle is always that the home ownership, affordable home ownership is always looked at as less than. And everything on the housing continuum matters, from getting someone into a shelter until they are able to be working and self-sustaining and own their own home. So I appreciate you sharing that, but a good win for affordable home ownership.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thanks, Josh.
And Colleen, you had asked about the land use component of this. There was a really strong push, and I'll give everybody a disclaimer that I represent local governments as well. And so I have a local government perspective on this, but the realtors and the builders and I would say housing advocates in the legislature brought forward legislation to require cities and counties in some cases to essentially eliminate single family housing zones and require multifamily housing in those zones. In one version, House Bill 1660, it was require accessory dwelling units. And both, it was a really ugly battle, was not productive at all. Both of those bills died. I do think there will be something we expect to see. Actually, in about 20 minutes, there's going to be a conference committee meeting on the bill that would add the climate change to the Growth Management Act. I think there's going to be some components in there that have to do with middle housing. So that I think there will be something going forward this session relative to land use, but won't be as drastic as completely taking away that local control of local jurisdictions to make those decisions about where housing, what types of housing should be going where. So
Thanks,
that's
Josh, for that update. Yeah, I appreciate that. I've been fighting the battle here locally with the city of Sequim.
Yep.
Mostly winning. So they're listening. So that's always a good thing.
That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see if it's all right, Colleen. I'm just going to go
Please,
up.
yeah.
What was the question was changes to the sheriff and police departments. There are the bills essentially that are going to go back and tweak the legislation from last year that really restricted law enforcement. Those bills are moving forward. So your local law enforcement will have more authority to use and more clarity around use of force. They'll have the ability to use non-lethal means again. So rubber bullets and bean bags. They'll have more clarity around when they can use force when they're responding in an involuntary treatment scenario. So where somebody's having behavioral health issues. And the only one that and several of those bills have been signed by the governor already. The one bill that is still up in the air and has not moved, is hanging in the balance, I would say, is the bill that gives additional authority and clarity around being able to engage in vehicular pursuits. And I don't know if that one's going to get across the line, but the majority of the bills have moved forward. They are in a format that I would say, and I'm speaking really generally here, I think law enforcement feels like they are improvements from last year's legislation. They don't go as far as I think law enforcement would like, but I think they're felt to be a reasonable step in the right direction. As a super generalized statement, I'm sure your sheriffs and police chiefs would have a lot more personal perspectives on that, but it's a step in the right direction.
Great, thanks. Michael Smith and then Jim McIntyre had questions as well, right at the end there.
Yeah, the bill that required owners who want to sell their mobile home parks to give tenant. I don't think those moved forward, Michael, but I'm sorry, I don't know.
I know right now in Forks, there's a manufactured home park where the owner is increasing the rents from $300 a month to $1,000. And he wants to turn everything into an Airbnb location. And those are people that, have single whites basically. And so they're not, and if the manufactured home or mobile home is older than a certain year, you really just can't move it. So those people that had purchased their manufactured home are just going to be totally out of luck. And it's a large park.
Yeah, and Michael, don't take this to the bank, but my recollection is those bills were moving and were very active last session. And I don't think they got across the line, and I don't think there was movement on them this year either. But again, don't quote me on that. I just don't remember. Jim McIntyre asked about, how much air is going to come out of the budget balloon next year after the COVID dollars are spent. I think a lot of what we're seeing is significant expenditure of federal dollars on primarily one-time expenditures. I think the real question will be, and I think the legislators, I think they all know that those are one-time dollars and they can't be banking on them.
Right.
I think the bigger question in my mind will be, how much do revenue collections slow down between now and next March, which is the revenue forecast that they'll base or February, I guess, that they'll base their biennial budget on. I don't think anybody knows.
Yeah.
What happens in Ukraine, what goes on with inflation, and
Yeah, we're in great uncertainty right now. What was behind that question was just thinking about our own expectations from a NOLA perspective of what's a realistic ask for next year, because we're in sort of unusual times right now, to say the least.
Totally. And I think the legislators have they have a sense of that. I think, you hear them talk about that in their different press conferences. And the question is, whether you agree with how they're acting upon that understanding. Debbie, I just put in the link to House Bill 1911. I could just tell very quickly from that
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, I have not been tracking this at all, so I don't know the first thing about it. I could tell you that it is not moving forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Patricia asked about multiple units per lot that did not move forward. Was there a restriction on Airbnbs? There were two versions of this. One bill, the version that moved forward said that local governments could not place owner occupancy requirements on ADUs. So basically, you couldn't restrict people from listing their ADUs on Airbnb. What I don't know is whether or not that provision will end up in the, amendment that we're going to see later this morning. The other, I see you shaking your head. I know that was kind of the perspective of local governments too. The other version did say that gave an exemption if you were providing short-term housing. So it was essentially the opposite policy. I don't think the legislature has a consensus opinion on this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So do you anticipate the transportation budget that, doesn't have enough funding? Do you anticipate they'll sweep a different budget, or are you expecting it'll just be a lower amount? Or do you not know?
What I've heard, and this is all just word of mouth and not from a legislator, so take it with a grain of salt, but with what I would say another well-informed lobbyist, is that they're planning to just use more general fund, more, Jim, more of those one-time federal dollars, moving that kind of money into the transportation budget for infrastructure investment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mike, you asked about changes to GMA, climate change. Yeah, something's gonna happen on that. That's the bill I'm referring to, that we'll be seeing the compromise version here soon. What I believe will be in there will be, it will remove the most, the sections that said local governments had to take actions to meet climate change emission goals and reduce vehicle miles traveled, right? Which was, for locals, was going to be the hardest thing to do. I do think there will be references in there to like needing to plan for resiliency and for changing climate and weather events. But we'll see here shortly.
What was the bill number for that one, Josh?
1099.
Is Senate bill?
House bill.
House bill. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Election integrity bills. No, I don't think there were. I don't think there were. There was a bill that had to do with restricting the use of, restricting open carry of firearms at polling places. That's the only one I really remember that moved forward on election issues. And I don't even know if you consider that an election issue.
And there was quite a bit of activity around the districting task force, and that they got in quite a bit of trouble, that they made decisions at the last minute and it wasn't through an open public meeting and they were fined and that kind of thing.
Yep, they were fined. The legislature still adopted the maps with some minor changes. There also has been a federal lawsuit brought against the state for violations of the Federal Voting Rights Act, primarily around the 15th legislative district over in Yakima County. So we'll see what happens with that.
I think legislators are so used to being able to go into caucus where they can discuss things without any transparency. But of course, all these laws are passed that prevent local governments from doing that, but that doesn't apply to the legislature.
Exactly. Yeah. Let me tell, as a local government advocate for my other part of my work, let me tell you how much I like to rant about that. Local governments all do it, in public. There was, one of the major topics this session was restraining gubernatorial executive powers. There was a Democratic sponsored bill that came out of the Senate that died on the House floor, it was a fascinating dynamic because the bill really didn't do very much. It essentially said that the legislature could revoke the governor's executive order if all four corners of the legislature agreed. So basically you had to have unanimous support amongst all four caucuses, which was a very high bar. And which actually they can do now, right? The legislature can come in with four, and with unanimous support, they can revoke an executive order now. So House Republicans essentially debated that bill to death. And the Democrats said, fine, if you're going to take up this much floor time, you're killing a bunch of other bills. We're just going to put this bill down. So that'll be a fascinating campaign talking point when we go into elections later this year. Matthew, I know in the SIMDARS exchange, I know it was in I believe it was both proposed transportation budgets. I don't know, we'll see later today whether or not it's in the compromise. I expect it will be, but I don't know that for sure. Yeah, the governor's criminalizing false statements around elections did not go forward.
And you said the transportation budget is supposed to be out by noon, and then the operating budget maybe sometime later today, right?
Yeah.
And I do have a thank you to Annika. She prepared a list of what items were funded in the capital budget that would go to Clallam County. I think there might have been a few in there for Jefferson, but if anybody wants that, I'll actually try to post that to the chat here.
Yeah, and we'll do, I'm not sure how many people on this call are on the NOLA mailing list, but we'll do a report here at the end of the week that's like our regular weekly report. And then we'll do an end of session report that is much more comprehensive after the governor finishes going through the bill review process, and we see if there's been any vetoes, which will be probably mid-April before that's all done. And then, Colleen, we haven't talked about this, but we'll want to kick off our NOLA process for next session before too long here and start talking about what we want to be pushing on.
Right. And did we have any other questions here? Yep. No, it looks like we've covered all of it. Yeah, so again, I will try to quickly put that list of the different projects from Clallam County into the here it is, into the chat here for everyone. File, save that. Okay. So does anyone else have any other questions as we're waiting here for me to get my that loaded up? If not.
Oh yeah, Colleen, you emailed me about the gala. I'm sorry, I lost track of that. NOLA members are more or less self-selected. We tried to keep a balance between Clallam and Jefferson County and a balance between governmental, non-governmental entities. I guess I would say from my perspective, anybody that's interested in attending those discussions, I think is welcome. We haven't had, it's not like we've had a lot of contentious, difficult issues that we've had to vote, on a razor's margin to really decide which direction we're going. So I personally believe, and I'm the contractor, so I don't really get a vote, but my view is, come on in and listen to what's going on. And if you have an opinion, let us know.
I will put the next meeting time in our blast email so people can join if they're interested, or contact me to get the link. So we don't have, 500 people there, but yeah. And NOLA stands for North Olympic Legislative Alliance. And we have operating principles and agreements from the 2 counties, the cities, a lot of different business groups and businesses. Yeah. All right. Well, if no one else has any further questions, I think it's 8:58. We can call it a morning. And Josh, you can jump off to track down what they're up to lately.
Yep, I'll do that. So nice to see everybody. Thanks for the time this morning.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We really enjoy working with Josh. He's terrific. So thanks for all your work.
Yeah,
Yep.
likewise. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.